Howdy folks, welcome to the Scannell agenda. Today's date is July 23rd and this is show number 27. Title of the show today is We Can Work It Out. Now I was just down buying my cranberry juice here at the donut shop, and they had that song on the radio by the Beatles, We Can Work It Out, you know, that was a great song. And I was thinking of this fantasy I have been having about having some fun with running for president, putting ideas on the table, raising a lot of money for charity, and I was thinking of the Trump Scannell ticket. Wouldn't that be fun? And the theme song might be We Can Work It Out. Now Donald Trump has that ability to get through and plow through and do deals. My ability would be basically along the lines of more of a cerebral thinking out government issues and government problems. That's what I kind of like to do. Like some people have a penchant, as I was saying, for solving these little Sudoku puzzles and that sort of rubbish, you know. Just, I don't know. That might be fun. We can work it out. So that's what I try to do, is work out ideas. As they used to call it, get the bugs out. It helps if you've got some practical experience with working out ideas. So I don't have too much of that, but a little bit. A little bit. But I consider it to be kind of a service, a public service, to pitch in as a volunteer, a low-level volunteer. So I thought that might be fun to do a little movie or, you know, raise some money. That RTB I was talking about, that's a roast, toast, and boast. Similar to the old Dean Martin roasts, if you can remember that. Now these were 1970s shows that were comedy shows. As my father would say, though, much truth is said in jest. So sometimes things come out when you're working things out in a comedy way or comedic way. One of the things I like to design are vehicles that tie into the new hydrogen economy, where, let's say, you wouldn't be thinking along those terms normally. A person wouldn't be thinking along those terms unless that person thought that the hydrogen infrastructure was realistic. Otherwise, you wouldn't really invest all the time that I've been spending on hydrogen. Let's say this is a vehicle. It's a motorcycle with hydrogen barrel tank outriggers, or water, hydrogen or water. And this would be for rural delivery into the woods or some such thing like that. So this kind of thing is what I do when I'm doodling. You know, these ideas pop into my head. So being that it's a vehicle, it's a motorcycle with these 6-barrel outriggers, all for slow speed, not fast speed, but you could carry hydrogen or water. That would be for rural use of a delivery of barrels. The axle would go right through the barrels. All right. So what do you think? We can work it out. Do you think Donald Trump and Steve Scannell would be helpers to the United States of America, not necessarily to the Republican Party establishment, because they're getting really cross, aren't they? It's funny. I love it personally because, I don't know, I just kind of identify with the underdog, and they're pointing at the underdog and they're saying, you have no credibility. You know, you're nothing. You have no credibility. You know, scoffing, a lot of scoffing. And, you know, that's, I guess when you get up and beyond a town meeting style politics where people are more or less civilized, more or less, I suppose then you get up into the dirty zone of, you know, federal politics and federal and state to some extent. As I was saying, we watched while Senator Wolf got knocked out of politics. We watched. And that was written up. It's kind of like, do you remember the story about the Dean yell? Well, it didn't make it as a story. Dean yelled, he said, like 3 o'clock in the morning. It was at one of his presidential rallies, and he said something to the effect of, ah, like that. You know, he was at a big rally for his candidacy. And that, according to even, I'm surprised by them, but even by WGBH, they jumped on board to trash this guy as, you know, wow, no credibility because he yelled. That's all, this guy's a doctor, you know. So, I mean, you know, if we let anything pass like that, if we let Donald Trump just get knocked out and get, you know, I can relate to Donald Trump having his business attacked, too. I can really personally relate to that. When you do get into being an activist and you're not, let's say, an activist is not lined up with the party, per se. Now, they may be lined up with the party somewhat, but the activist is usually considered a special worker, and they're working in depth on some reform or another, or some changes that are not quite mainstreamed quite yet. But most of the changes in this country come up the ranks, not through the party system per se, but they kind of filter in and they take a little time to develop some strength and some, they say 5%, and then, you know, so. But I like Donald Trump quite a bit because I think his sentiments about the border are indicative that he does respect the rule of law. Now let's look at the rule of law, new and old, in the USA as it relates to the party sentiments about the illegal immigration issue. On the left wing, you've got your typical old-style USA politics would include, you know, the fringes and the scoff laws and the conscientious objectors and, let's say, civil disobedience, you know, Thoreau and all that. Now, if you take that, that's a constant, let's say, on the fringe areas, and then you add to that the welcoming of illegal immigration for compassion-based reasons. Well, now, your fringe just doubled in size. And then on the other side, you've got the, you know, let's say your normal fringe elements that we've had for many, many years would be your right-wing libertarian, I'm not going to pay my taxes, I hate the government, that sort of rubbish, fringe rubbish. So we still have that, but now we have the welcoming of illegal immigration and the, you know, the cognitive blessing of something that is patently illegal because it depresses wages, and wages depressed are good for capitalism. Okay, so that is the thinking. That's not my thinking, that depressing wages are a scenario that's always really good for capitalism. You know, that's great. That's not my thinking. So the rule of law, new and old. Sometimes I dabble in theology, Bible unreality syndrome. This one is. God gives us gifts. You know, if you list the gifts that God gives us, the Bible must be considered, you know, solid for its use as a moral reference. But we also have God-given talents too. And we have to use all the gifts in proportion, the Bible and our wisdom and the Bible. It's a balancing act. So to trash our God-given talent and spirit and wisdom, these are gifts, because the Holy Bible and Word of God is overwhelmingly superior, is not realistic in God's eyes. Is this true or false? And that's the real question, and may be false wisdom based on the false God of the Bible being in fact God Himself. And I think a lot of people, this is what I mean by Bible unreality, when you talk about the Bible as being the deity, as being God or a God. The Bible is real, and our gifts are of God, and they are real, and there really are no conflicts of interest or conflicts if we are within reason and we do a lot of introspection and praying. So I write in the area of theology because, of course, I went to Catholic school, raised by nuns, as I say, raised by nuns, raised by a great community, great family. So I enjoy that. I'm not a person who has battled with religious problems in my lifetime. I pretty much came from a family of cafeteria Catholics. So when I was a kid, this was in the 1960s and early 70s, and I was never a teenager in the 70s. I think I turned 13 in 1970, so I'm a 70s generation kid. But you know, I'm from a family of questioners, cafeteria Catholics, but you know, my mom in her elder years, even when she was senile, she could still recite all the Latin prayers. You know, it was deeply ingrained in her. She went to Mass every day when she was in World War II over there in Europe. As she says, taking care of the boys in the Battle of the Bulge and that kind of thing. So my parents didn't really, but we had priests over all the time from the Holy Trinity Church in Harwich, and quite often on Sundays they'd love to come over, and we'd have friends over and all that. So I was raised with religion, and I enjoy it, and I like it. I like religion. I like spirituality too, but I like religion, and I like all the artworks, etc., and you know. So anyway, all right. Here we have, what do we have here? High density polyethylene and materials preform. Oh yeah, I did this the other day, and I'm working on this tripe system, which I am now calling the Unified Utility Green Grid System, because that describes the whole of the system better than tripe. Tripe describes the pipe, and I liked that track pipe. Tripe. That was kind of clever, I thought. But it doesn't describe a holistic system. So UGS, Unified Utility Green Grid System. You could call it Unified Grid System and just take a couple words out, and that would work too. But I'm open on what we want to call this. But This is construction details that I'm working on for designing and building, jigging out, as we would say in boat building, for the building of these track pipes and ancillary support systems. But this would be just for the pipe itself. 70% of the materials would be laid in place and preformed. That material would be the high-density polyethylene, bamboo as fiber, or wood as fiber, tar sands as a filler. I have it figured out that the oily tar sands, when they're cleaned, will provide a nice filler for the, we used to say the epoxy, but in this case it might not be a lot of epoxy, maybe some. So you have to really concentrate on what is going to last long term with these plastic materials and plasticized wood or plasticized bamboo. Nothing that would rot, of course. You've got lightning protection factors, so you'd possibly have a blimp coming in, a specialized blimp, and it would have legs. It would anchor in, and it would take on materials, and it would take on some equipment, and then it would just go down the line and extrude in place this track pipe, which, as I mentioned again, might be about a 5 or 6 foot diameter large pipe, with the interior walls being 18 inches or 24 inches, somewhere in there. And then embedded in the wall of the pipe proper would be, let's just say, 12 conduits of 4 to 6 or 8 inches, and depending on if you configure it to be circular, oval, or egg style, or how you configure it would, you depend on how you worked out in what kind of pipes you're going to be using as integrated subsystem pipes for the larger unit, the track pipe. So there'd be, in all, with my basic design, would be 13 pipes. You'd have the main in the middle, and that would be for compressed air. You could put hydrogen in it in some cases as a storage unit for the hydrogen, low pressure probably. There's no reason to pressurize hydrogen too much. And then, of course, okay, did I say hydrogen, compressed air of different pressures, and then oxygen-rich compressed air. These are the green fuels of the future. So when I'm thinking about, let's say, designing this, that's nutty, that motorcycle with the outriggers, and these are detachable barrels carrying either water or hydrogen. Well, I could build that. Some guys could build that, or some tinkerers, or I didn't mean to say guys. Some people could build that and tinker around with that. Now, you wouldn't come up with that, let's say, if you weren't thinking that hydrogen will have infrastructure in the future. See, I'm thinking and designing as such that hydrogen does, that's my base of philosophy, hydrogen does have a strong future with these utility grids that I'm designing. So you're pre-staging, back to the high-density polyethylene and materials, preform for these track pipes. So you'll come in with your blimp, which is a construction extrusion blimp, specified purpose for basically running along the train lines and extruding out these finished and faired. These pipes have to be incredibly fair. That means smooth. And I was always pretty good at fairing a hull, they tell me. So, getting a hull, sanding it smooth so that if you paint it black, it becomes a beautiful thing and kind of like mirror. So you'll have other supportive things that I'm not talking about right here. I'm just talking about the pipe. I'm not talking about stands for these track pipes on monorails or wide gauge or much along those lines. I'm just talking about the pipe that probably, I'm thinking about 98% of the materials will not be coming in on the blimp. Maybe 2% of the materials will be presented by, from the blimp. Probably things like your lightning protection and that sort of thing. But the tar sands filler for these resins, I think, is important because we want these resins to reach their peak strength in about 100 years or 125, 50 years, and then the strength will become less, the brittleness will increase. And I keep going back to the fiberglass boat in the woods. You can pull it out of the woods and hose it off and use it. Now, depressed wages are good for capitalism, and depressed wages are bad for capitalism. That's the title of this little thinking, it's in the thinking category. So I think you could make arguments both ways, but it's dependent. It's balance sheet dependent. Are we talking about the public balance sheet, or are we talking about the private balance sheet? This is like fisheries work, okay? If you're doing fisheries work, people get all wrapped up in whether or not fishermen should be targeting codfish, for instance, right now, which I don't think we should be fishing for cod. All right, and that's a fisherman might be looking at a fisherman's balance sheet and not so much at the public balance sheet. So if you've got two balance sheets and the one kind of is center stage, then that's what, your thinking is going to be based on that. Now we have classes of people too. So we have a middle class. Let's say we have 2 or 3 classes of the rich. Let's say the first class rich over $50 million in value, monetary value. And the second class rich would be just, anything under 50 million. Then you've got another class of Americans here that I'm defining as poor and disabled. And then another class yet for government workers. And maybe another class we should write up would be the working poor class of people, rather than thinking of just working people as middle class. Okay. So we have middle class mindset, but wealthy. Now we have people too, if you want to talk about these classes of people that came up from the bottom, and they may have a middle class mindset and a very patriotic mindset, such as Ross Perot or Warren Buffett or Branson with Virgin Mobile. I don't know if I really don't know if maybe Donald Trump belongs in that category. I would like to think so. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I kind of like him. And Alan Greenspan, let's say, what class would he? He's got a sterile view for the wealthy, political fringe, pro-rich. Let's say, I think I told the story about Milton Friedman and the push for the privatization of our national parks. Okay, I would like to think of that as fringe. So, all right, social services stuff. I go to some meetings for social services. We do have a need that's not being filled, and I'd like to fill that. And along the lines of something that would be a consortium of thinkers, people who can discuss social problems, and people who can discuss Phragmites, and then really, work hard and do their homework and have pre-discussions and then come on the air in their communities, and then, just doggedly working on some of these issues, because there is a need, especially in Hyannis, for some sort of a consortium of thinkers. Because if you go to a meeting, if you're part of this welfare state and you go to a meeting, say I go to a Duffy, D-I-G, it's called Duffy Input Group, which is good. Let's say there's some people there with some experience and background in the client end of things, whether it's, homeless or mental illness, or just these people are interested in helping out. But now the problem may come up that, we have to get centered, we can't be discussing the world's problems and all that stuff. Well, these problems that plague Hyannis have to be gotten after. And they have to be gotten after by people who are experts in their field. We can't have people just, going off in their corners and saying, well, this is not my job. We don't have a good newspaper in most places in this country anymore because of the co-optation by the rich of the news services. And I say that because the value of a newspaper seems to be greatly inflated, and a mystery to a lot of people as to why a newspaper would sell for such a large amount of money. I think the Cape Cod Times was owned by the Rupert Murdoch Group, and they were caught red-handed over in England and Britain, over there, for basically king-making and rigging things up, and they weren't popular over there since they did get caught. It's usually not something a fish buyer or a newspaper would get caught doing. It's called collusion in the fish buyer business.